Well, good morning. Thank you for braving the elements to come out here today. My name is Melinda Richter. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Business Cluster. For those of you who don't know about the EBC, it is the largest clean tech incubator in the United States. It's based out of San Jose. We were also the first clean tech incubator that was ever started in the U.S., and we were started in 1994. So our goal is to help commercialize key technologies in the clean tech area. And we work with various partners like the California Energy Commission, NREL, CTO, et cetera. And our goal is to get those companies from concept to actually into the marketplace. So one of the newest things we've done recently is brought on board an entrepreneur in residence to help the companies. His name is Evan Goldman. He was the lead counsel at BrightSource, who did their private financing of about $160 million and did all of their DOE grant and loan applications. So he's a great new member to the team, and he's there to help our client companies. So our goal is to make sure that they get successful new energy storage solutions to the market. So with that, our panel today is about market challenges and opportunities. And so we have a diverse group of people here that will represent very different perspectives on that. And so what we're going to do is have them first introduce themselves, and then we're going to have their perspective on the market challenges and opportunities with regards to their view on life. So with that, I'm just going to ask them to first of all introduce themselves, where they're from, and their corporation, and how that relates to clean tech and energy storage. We're going to start with Hal.
Hi, I'm Hal LaFlash from Pacific Gas and Electric, where I'm the Director of Emerging Clean Technologies. And my small group looks at just the different technologies that we expect to deploy in our electric portfolio over the future, especially over the next 10 years. As an example, the 300 megawatt project that Brad Roberts mentioned, the Cays project in Bakersfield, is my project. We prepared the grant on that and applied to the Department of Energy and the California Energy Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, so we have our funding on that, and I'll talk about that more later.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Burks. I'm a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop. Pillsbury is a law firm of about 800 lawyers throughout the world. We have a very strong focus on energy as well as technology, and what we're seeing in this climate is a collision of energy with technology. I'm in the Silicon Valley office, where we focus, of course, upon the emerging growth companies and the new technologies, taking them all the way from the garage all the way through public offerings. But our firm, we incorporated Standard Oil, but we also incorporated Intel Corporation, and so we're dealing with all kinds of things as issues in the environmental sector, the regulatory sectors, both on the state and federal level, and the public policy as we grow this industry.
Good morning. My name is Alok Gupta. I'm the analyst at the California Public Utilities Commission, and my focus is on a variety of issues for smart grid and energy storage, as well as demand response. And we have a fair number of proceedings at the commission. None of them are directly focused on energy storage right now, but quite a few are starting to look at issues relating to storage. So there are a lot of policy implications and challenges associated with energy storage, which I hope to talk about later in the panel discussion.
My name's Janice Lynn, and I'm the managing partner at Strategy Consulting. We're a boutique strategy consulting firm that focuses exclusively on clean energy. We've been doing work in energy storage for a little more than 5 years, and about a year ago we founded an advocacy group, the first ever here in California, called the California Energy Storage Alliance. And the mission of that organization is to promote the use of energy storage to accelerate the deployment of renewables and a more stable and secure electric system.
Great. So when we thought about this topic, we thought about the key questions that we thought you'd want to know as either storage companies that are trying to get your technology to market or part of the industry that's supporting it. And so we wanted to talk about opportunities in terms of the size of the market and thinking about, who's the customer, what the value is, what the problem is, and how to look at getting it to market. But we also wanted to look at policy roadblocks and how there could be perhaps some innovative new federal and state opportunities to get around those, or to remove the roadblocks, let's put it that way. And then also look at where is the financing, where is the funding, and what are the keys to commercial success. So each of these panelists are going to bring their perspective on those topics, and we'll ask some questions amongst ourselves, or I'm encouraging the panelists to ask each other questions, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for you guys to ask questions. So in the last 10 minutes, we'll get to you. So hold on to your questions and we'll get back. So with that, I'm going to start with Hal and ask him to really characterize what the opportunity is in storage.
Okay. Thanks, Melinda. Brad covered a lot of this, so some of this might be repetitive or might give me another spin on it as a utility who has potential of using a lot of these storage devices. There's somewhere between 10 and 12 different value streams you can get out of a storage device, and not every project can hit every value stream. So depending on what you're looking at and the cost of the project, you may need to have more value streams to make it economic. But some of the obvious ones, and Brad mentioned, is electricity price arbitrage, where the power at night is generally cheaper than the power in the daytime, and we see that because of, as mentioned, the growth of wind and other off-peak generating sources. We see that spread getting wider. So there'll be an increasing role for electricity arbitrage there. That one would be relatively easy to harvest. Just the capacity of the avoided generation that you won't have to build if you have storage has a value. Wind, for example, doesn't provide much reliable capacity. Some systems give it a 20% rating, some give it a 5% rating, but it's a very low number. Whereas if you're putting in a gas turbine or something, you're going to get a 100% rating on that. If you're avoiding that gas turbine by putting in storage, then you can get that value for the storage. So there's a capacity value and a market for that today, so that's reasonably easy to harvest that also. The ancillary services that were mentioned earlier, there are at least half a dozen different ancillary services. As mentioned, the frequency service is something that's provided by really fast response generation, or fast response storage, or can be. There are others like regulation services. If you really looked at how a power curve looks and what's going on from minute to minute, there's a lot of activity going on. A lot of generators have to go on and off or up and down in order to ramp up and regulate that to keep the system even. And it's a little bit slower response in the frequency. It doesn't have to be quite as fast, but it has to be a lot of it during the day. And storage is particularly good at providing regulation services, and you can harvest those. Now, some of the things that are a little more site-specific are like T&D upgrade deferral, transmission and distribution upgrade deferral. If there's a line that has more load on it and you have to reinforce that line, well, there's a cost to reinforce that line, and there's a time lag to reinforce that. And storage is much faster to deploy, so you could put that in place while you're working on putting in a longer-term solution. If it's just a small one-time event, storage may be the permanent solution. Generally speaking, load growth keeps on occurring, so storage may be a transitional solution, but storage being portable, you can move it to another site later. There could be some areas where you have just congestion on a line at a certain time, and that's going to become more evident with solar and wind being added to the system. Solar operates certain hours, wind operates certain hours. The line is designed for a base load application. That's the other use. If you look at what Brad was talking about earlier, if you're building a power line from the Midwest to where the load centers are, and you're going to try to size it for the full output of the wind, you're going to be sizing it from 2.5 to 3 times bigger than you'd need. If instead you could put storage closer to the resource, you could actually get the size of that line down. So where storage is located, well, you could have benefits on the source end of it or benefits on the load end of it. The value of time use of energy when you start moving from these things that I've been mentioning so far have been more utility value streams. But if you start moving more to customer value streams and you're putting storage behind the meter, where the customer has a chance to deal with the arbitrage value of daytime versus nighttime power or demand charges. Most utility tariffs have a demand charge schedule on them. If the customer can use storage to reduce their demand and keep it within a certain range, there's some savings that are possible there. Trying to think what other ones might be of interest. Some of the things I want to talk about from the standpoint of what we're doing with storage. We have, and have had now for 25 years, one of the larger pumped hydro systems in the U.S. We have 1,200 megawatts, Helms project, which is in the mountains above Fresno. It's been a very reliable part of the system. It's been something that, as Brad mentioned, pump storage went in originally at about the same time as we built our nuclear power plant, with the thought that would help keep the nuclear plant running flat out. It's done that, but much more than that. It's become a sort of an essential element of the integrated grid in California. It's been used to keep the grid intact. So it's a real advantage to some of these bulk scale storage systems. So the next one we are looking forward to is the 300 megawatt compressed air energy storage. The difference between this project and the two that are out there today, the two that are out there now, one in Alabama and one in Germany, as Brad mentioned, use salt domes. Salt domes have pretty defined geology and it's easy to model and everything. What we're moving towards is a porous rock structure, and it hasn't been done before for these purposes, but these type of structures are used every day for natural gas storage. The difference being natural gas storage, you cycle once a year. This we're going to cycle every day. So that's the intent, is to try to bring this into an area where you have a common geology. Salt domes are not very prevalent in California. These type of porous rock structures are prevalent. They're just like an aquifer or like a gas reservoir. And the project we're working on is sited right under the 500 kilovolt line that the new wind is all tying into from the Tehachapi. So it'll be very close to that, and it'll help us with 300 megawatts there to what's proposed to be 4,500 megawatts of new wind coming in. So it'll help us manage that. Last, we have a smaller project, a 4 megawatt sodium sulfur project, which is actually in Silicon Valley. It's going in now, or going in this year rather. That's going to be used for more of the transmission and distribution deferral. This is to take care of some power quality issues on a distribution line and to help some of the high-tech customers in that area get a better quality of service. So I think that's a pretty good setup for going from there. I think you're going to hand it to Janice to talk about all these opportunities that I just set up and why they're kind of hard to realize some of them.
Yes, so Janice, why don't we bounce back to you? We'll bounce back to Hal. But Janice, why don't you talk about what are some of the policy roadblocks that you see that are in place right now that are stopping storage companies from actually bringing their solutions to market? Because, you know, granted, you have 3 great solutions there, Hal, but it's 3, right? So we're very limited in what we've done so far. So Janice, you want to talk about the roadblocks and maybe some of the things you've thought about or your organization has thought about to help remove those?
Energy technology, there we go. I would say the chief one is conceptually is how do you align all the benefits that storage provides with the particular buyer of the equipment. And storage is this great asset that, no matter where you put it, there's going to be benefits for many different stakeholders to, let's take a customer-sited example. Brad had some great photos up there. An end customer can install a storage system and they receive emergency backup, power quality benefits, maybe some energy arbitrage benefits, peak demand capture, but then there'll be a host of system-wide benefits, improving, reducing the peak load on that feeder, improving the system load factor, and it's very hard today for that end user to be compensated for the system-wide benefits of that storage investment. So conceptually, that's our biggest challenge, and as often is the case, where you have your biggest challenges is also your biggest opportunity, and that was the spirit behind the formation of CISA, is that, well, the venture capital community is really busy. We've got a whole host of really exciting energy storage technology startups here in the Silicon Valley. But where our efforts come in is we're hoping to turn that innovation and do some exciting things on the market design front. And one of the things that we found, we're a year into this, is that storage is actually pretty widely recognized among a lot of folks that, yes, we need that. Of course, there's some perceptions that we're not commercially ready or cost effective, and there's a whole range of that. But for the most part, different stakeholders in our system, including the ratepayer advocates, understand conceptually the value of storage. The challenge is, I think that there still remains, as Brad mentioned, this educational component, so there's a pretty wide range, and two, storage is this funny thing that we say we're an orphan technology because we're sort of a part of every energy policy. You can pick anyone, call it procurement, renewables, demand response, electric vehicles, resource adequacy, self-distributed generation. We fit everywhere, yet we belong nowhere. There is no, and the reason is we're a new type of energy technology. We've never thought about storage. Our system is built as our electric system with the idea that it's one-way flow, and suddenly you have an asset that can do intelligent two-way flow. It can be dispatched, it can be networked and communicated, and there really isn't a policy framework for us to live in. So we're everywhere, but we have no home. And so that's another great opportunity for the industry to come together and say, here is where we want to play. This is the framework. We're not T, we're not D, we're not supply, we're not demand. We're actually this thing in the middle that enables optimization of our system.
So what kind of policy frameworks have you been proposing that would help overcome these challenges?
Well, that is sort of a real-time question that we're following. From CESA's perspective, we're active across a pretty broad range of storage markets. On one end of the spectrum is ancillary services and the wholesale market, so we are a stakeholder to the CAISO process to allow non-generating resources to participate in ancillary services markets. And that's a direct replacement of fossil generation. We are also working actively, and I'm sure Alok will have a lot to say about this, in many proceedings at the PUC. And we're working closely with the legislation, with California Air Resources Board, which is implementing the RPS, the Attorney General's Office, and the CEC through the Integrated Energy Policy Report. So that gives you sort of a flavor for the breadth. In terms of how we can carve out a home for ourselves, our feeling is that storage, if you had to choose one area, because we're in distributed generation and renewables, the one area that of current energy policy focus that touches everything is really the smart grid. And storage is a key enabler of the smart grid. It's really hard to have a sustainable, islandable microgrid without storage, even if you have a lot of DG. So that's the policy framework that we're putting forth.
Well, and Sylvia, I know you're working a lot on a federal level with what's going on with policy and what new things are coming out that might actually help facilitate things. Do you want to talk about what's happening on the federal level?
Sure. To go back to the opportunities, regulation is often looked at and frowned upon, but it really is becoming is creating big opportunities, I think, for the whole energy industry as well as for the battery. And to Janice's point about this kind of being an island technology, I think there is broader and broader recognition that we have to have storage. Brad certainly mentioned that in his discussion, as did Hal, and so the things that at the federal level that we're seeing are first just the recognition that we have to, so much of the stimulus, it could have been done, the government could have created stimulus and said, let's build roads, let's build bridges. Instead, it devoted a huge part of that to the energy and creating innovative new technologies and upgrading our system. So that's one policy issue that makes it very evident that the federal government recognizes the importance and the need for a new energy system. The new ARPA-E bill that came out, or the funding opportunity that was just released, and actually the deadline was for the concept paper was last Friday. That kind of came a step closer, I think, to recognizing that we're not going to be able to do things through lithium ion. We need a lot of different types of technology. Some of the earlier stimulus awards, were heavily lithium ion, and I think that and it's even stated in the ARPA-E report that there's a growing doubt in the minds of the technology industry that lithium ion batteries will have the density that is needed in order to have a utility scale battery or storage solution. So that's one of the big opportunities, is that it's not only lithium ion, but it's a lot of different technologies that are being looked at now in the new ARPA-E funding opportunity. Those who were invited to participate were not only lithium-ion batteries, but other types of lithium-based batteries, lithium sulfur, lithium air, lithium metal, but also metal air, things that don't include any kind of lithium at all, which I think is a good step, since lithium is not necessarily abundant in our country, and it is, the sources of lithium are in places that are not necessarily tremendously friendly towards the United States.
So just before you go off of that, so how much money is set aside for storage, either through ARA or ARPA-E? And how much of that is going to smaller companies versus bigger companies?
Yeah, well, most of the money that's going to smaller companies is going through the ARPA-E. There are certainly, early on in the summer of last year, there was a lot of money that was for electric vehicle batteries. That went, just the largest chunk by far went to kind of prop up the car businesses and their new technologies in this area, and most of that was also lithium ion battery technology. In the new ARPA-E, the solicitation is for $100 million, and there are actually 3 different areas. Electric vehicle batteries is one of the 3, and the DOE may decide to divvy that up in any way. So it could be that all 100 million of it goes to batteries. It's almost assuredly not going to be the case. But those chunks of money that are being handed out under the current ARPA-E are anywhere between $500,000 and $10 million. They're expected to be, and those awards will come out in probably end of February or March timeframe. Of the first ARPA-E, that was $150 million, and for ARPA-E, there's what Congress has allocated is $400 million. So we had the $150 million earlier in the year, and about 23% of that was given to battery types of technologies. And so now we have the $100 million. So we still have in ARPA-E another 250, 350 is another, a few million dollars, tens of millions of dollars that may go to batteries, may go to something else. So we'll see.
And then any other programs or incentives that you see coming down the path?
Yeah, what we have we have bills both in the Senate and the House right now for batteries, which is really a great step forward. For a long time we've seen tax credits for renewable energy for the generation of it, without answering the question, once we generate it, what do we do with it? And so, finally, Congress has passed or is considering a bill, which hopefully will pass, to provide for a tax credit for the hooking up to the grid, as well as some of the other things that Brad was talking about. That for example, for the communities, for residential areas, so storage types of technologies that you as an individual in your residence, if you buy that, you yourself can get a 30% tax credit on the storage technologies that can go back into that can help you store energy that is created locally and go back to the grid. The one that is non-residential is a 20% tax credit, and that's still being considered, of course. for those technologies that actually hook up to the grid and are larger scale.
Great. Well, so now I'm going to come over to you, Alok, and talk about what are the policy challenges that you see from a California perspective. And I know you have some innovative new options that you, the CPUC, are thinking about to help facilitate technology commercialization, getting it to market. So, here's a forum for you to get people's feedback on it.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, at the Commission, we're certainly interested in encouraging more dialogue and soliciting input from all the stakeholders out there in our proceeding. In storage, one could say that it's a lot about policy. I mean, there's certainly a lot of technology issues and market development issues, but back to Brad's question of what's holding up storage, he did not list policy as one of the issues, and I think some people would say that the lack of a suitable policy that smoothly integrates storage into an overall regulatory framework is a big issue right now. And and we have some opportunities at this time to try to correct that and enable storage to do what it can do. Now, we do have a smart grid proceeding at the Commission in progress right now. I don't know how many of you know that. We just concluded Phase 1 last December, and Phase 2 is just getting underway, and the objective of Phase 2 is to develop smart grid deployment requirements for the utilities by July 2010. That's 6 months from now. And I think the consensus is that storage is definitely an important element of smart grid. However, at this point, by the way, let me back up. I should mention an important disclaimer. In some of my comments, I'll be referring to decided Commission policy, and in some other comments, I'll be perhaps more conjecturing and speculating as a staff member. So hopefully you can distinguish the two and don't confuse the latter comments
That's right.
as an
off
indication
the record.
of Commission
Don't worry
policy.
about those cameras back there.
Yes, right.
Not a problem.
So coming back to the smart grid proceeding, at the moment the Commission is still looking at the question of whether storage will be addressed as part of the smart grid proceeding, or will we have a separate proceeding focused on storage. So that question aside, let me just talk about some of the challenges of posed by storage from a policy perspective. It is a very unique and interesting situation. I mean, storage has many different characteristics than utility assets traditionally have been. Traditionally, utility assets have been single function. They do transmission or distribution or generation. And here you have an asset that's multifunctional and can do many things at the same time. And so it has multiple value streams, and it cuts across different jurisdictions. So it becomes very difficult to allocate costs and do cost recovery. And so, for example, you have transmission being managed by FERC, and you have distribution rate base being managed by PUC, and generators are under the oversight of the wholesale market, which is CalISO in California, which in turn is being managed by FERC. So you have lots of different jurisdictions, and you can see, you can call it a spaghetti. I mean, it's just paralysis in terms of who moves first to tackle the storage issue. So I think this is going to require some outside-the-box policy approaches in terms of aligning benefit and cost, in terms of developing collaborative models. And by collaborative models, I mean partnership between utilities, end users, and third-party storage providers to be able to fully capture the value of storage and to be able to fully develop the market around it. So let me talk a little bit about that. There are a couple of distinct markets for storage from a policy perspective that one could talk about. Clearly, and it has been already touched on in different comments. One is clearly what I would call long-term storage, time shifting or load shifting, off-peak charging and on-peak discharging. Another market is short-term storage or ancillary services, as in frequency regulation to stabilize the grid. And then there are other more secondary and tertiary markets like reliability applications in terms of outage mitigation and peak shaving. So let me come back to the first one. Potentially, I think the load shifting is the most significant market, but it also has big challenges in terms of how do you realize the value of it. Now, I mean, there are three ways you could deploy large amounts of load shifting storage. I mean, you can obviously have utilities deployed, and you can have third-party storage providers deployed, and then the third entity is end user. I think there is some thinking that load shifting application is best done on a distributed scale and is best done in terms of efficiency right at the load points. So it's somewhat problematic to have utilities manage a large number of assets, small assets, very close to the load point, presumably right on the customer premise. And in fact, historically, the Commission has certainly been very reluctant to have the utilities be involved on customer's premise. All their obligations have traditionally terminated at the meter. So somehow you want the end user involved in, if you want to fully realize this market. And you know, sometimes people think that in order to get large amounts of storage, utility is the only way. That perhaps is not necessarily true in these times. You look at the solar initiative in California, we are calling for 3,000 megawatts in 10 years. So that's 6% of system peak in California. So you can get lots of capacity through consumer action if properly enabled. So why are end users not deploying load storage? I mean, on the next panel, the CEO of Megawatt, Dave McMillan, will be speaking. Now, he told me once that he tried to develop a business plan around this concept of load shifting, but all the analysis indicated that from an end user perspective, you don't get enough value from the energy arbitrage based on the rate design today. So there's no business case that pencils out for end users. But interestingly, if you do the same analysis for an end user owned storage from a utility perspective, at least back of the envelope calculation shows that the value to the utility in terms of avoided cost for peak generation and other support costs required to provide peak generation could potentially exceed the cost of the storage unit. And this is storage unit owned by the end user. So we have a situation here where, unlike other assets, you have an asset with positive externalities. End user owns the asset, but most of the benefit flows to the utility. So this is where policy...
Can I give an example?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt Alok, but here in California, this particular example that Alok just brought up, we actually have a program, an active program in California that provides incentives to end users who want to install storage. And it's a capacity-based incentive. It's actually, coincidentally, the very same program that provided incentives to solar about 8-9 years ago. It's a self-generation incentive program. And a year ago, the Commission decided to allow storage to participate in this program, provided it's coupled with eligible technologies. And at the time, the only eligible technologies through this program were wind and fuel cells. And this is a program that has several $100 million accumulated. It's funded at about $83 million per year through 2011. And legislation was just passed last fall that is revamping this program, and hopefully, once we get through the implementation process, will enable incentives for storage in standalone form, also distributed, and incentives for storage coupled with solar. So that example that Brad was talking about before could be realized very soon, like within the next 6 months.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Jan. So, but SCHIP is a program that recently, through legislation, is now eligible for storage. But still, the SCHIP is perhaps a short-term solution or an interim solution in terms of providing subsidies and incentives for the attraction of storage. From a policy perspective, what you would like to do is to develop some long-term solutions. And so coming back to this problem that I described where potentially there's a lot of value to the utility for an end-user storage, how do we address that? So in one of the proceedings last year, demand response proceeding, there was a decision issued by the Commission. And that decision, among a lot of things, has some directives to the utilities relating to storage. And in response to that decision, next month, the three major utilities, San Diego, Edison, and PG&E, will be launching a study effort focusing on establishing the value to the utility in terms of avoided cost for a storage unit deployed by the end user. So once we have a handle on that, let me finish the directive. So the other part of the directive is that once you have established that value, that the utilities are now will be required to explore some proposals as to how they could return a portion of that value back to the end user, perhaps in the form of an upfront rebate to reduce the installed cost perceived by the end user. So that's potentially one long-term method of trying to address this alignment of benefits and cost. And I guess to address the concern that sometimes the utility studies are obviously done from the perspective of the utility and may not reach the appropriate conclusions. They
don't want to give their money away.
Right.
Yeah.
The directive also calls for the study to be an open process. So at the beginning of the study, the utilities will be collecting input from all the stakeholders as to what should go into this valuation exercise, what all the factors are that should be considered. And then they're also required to report back the findings to all the interested parties and take their input into account when the proposals are developed. And these proposals are due back to the Commission in December of this year.
Yep. So, Janice had a comment
I just
on that.
wanted to comment on, Alok, your comment that it's not a long-term solution. And I'd like to respectfully disagree. I think it potentially could be, meaning this incentive payment, which is it's a transfer payment from all ratepayers to a particular ratepayer. And the analogy is, we're 10, 12 years into solar, and today we still have incentives that are paid to end users who want to own and operate solar or third parties. And how we envision the storage market growing is very much along the same lines, that there will be many applications of storage. Distributed storage is one. There'll be wholesale, centralized, transmission connected, distribution interconnected, as well as many different ownership models. And in the case of customer or third-party ownership, there's lots of evidence in the renewable, especially solar industry, where payments from utilities, meaning ratepayer-funded funds, that compensate for the positive externalities of that renewable or the storage can be very successfully made to third parties or end users. That doesn't mean to say that that will be the only method. There will certainly be lots of room for utility ownership, rate-basing storage. Who knows, maybe someday we'll have a storage portfolio standard, much like we have a renewable portfolio standard. So this is why this industry is so exciting.
So we need a more systemic solution that is going to pass off the benefits to the appropriate players and make sure that everybody is rewarded for their behavior, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to money, right? We're all motivated by money and how much we either get back or how much less we spend. So Hal, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I wanted to comment on Janice's last thought about a energy storage portfolio standard. I think what we probably need is a clean energy portfolio standard and let all these things factor into it, so we're not sub-optimizing if I say we need this much of this and this much of that and this much of this, and have 6 different standards and none of them add up to the bottom line. So I think, yeah, there would be some value in saying that storage has a role in that clean energy standard.
So I know it was a short amount of time that we had, and the panelists are just getting warmed up. So I want to turn it over to you to ask some questions based on what you've heard today or other questions that you have relative to what you are doing. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, down here.
Yeah, I have a question for Sylvia. Could you talk about what the FERC may be doing addressing storage in the wholesale arena?
I have to say, I'm over my head on that one. We have our FERC group back in D.C. who do handle those issues, and so if you get to me, give me your email, then I can get you some information on that.
Any of the panelists?
I don't know what the current activities are, but some of the past FERC activities have caused some of the confusion about where you collect these costs. There was a proposal 2-3 years ago now to put a pump storage project into FERC rates, and FERC said, no, that doesn't belong in transmission. And so that's caused a lot of confusion. I think they're finding a way to revisit that and find a way to fine-tune that answer, because it stalled a lot of projects.
I could add a small comment too. I'm not within CISA. I'm not the lead on the ancillary services, but I can tell you that FERC issued 2 orders. There were 719 and 890, which was an order to the independent system operators around the country, basically ordering them to think about allowing non-generation resources to provide ancillary services. So the ancillary services include voltage regulation, spinning reserve, and these have all traditionally been provided by fossil fuel plants. They're expensive, they produce pollution, and I think FERC recognized that non-generating resources, meaning storage and or demand response, could provide the same benefit to the system operator. That has been implemented, I believe, fully in PJM territory, Midwest ISO, and we're still working on it here in Cal ISO. And the Cal ISO is going to come up with a draft proposal very soon. This is something that we're tracking very carefully, and we are a part of that stakeholder process, we meaning CISA.
If I can add on to that?
Sure.
I mean, in terms of the ancillary services and the Cal ISO under directive to open up the market and have storage participate in that, that certainly is an important element. But my concern is that may not be enough to enable storage market to develop around ancillary services. And the issue is that the need for a long-term buyer. The way the ancillary services market are operating today, Cal ISO basically procures all the resources one day ahead of time and charges the bill to all the utilities based on their pro rata requirements. And so utilities per se have no motivation to go out and strike contracts for storage-based ancillary services, and they're primarily striking contracts for energy, in terms of long-term contracts for plants and renewable portfolio, and these plants then turn around and sell some of their capacity on the ancillary services market. So I think this is an issue we need to look at and gather some more input from the different stakeholders as to whether the PUC should look at a portfolio requirement for the utilities to meet portfolio specifically for ancillary services that must be met through perhaps storage, or perhaps the requirement is some kind of a clean ancillary services portfolio requirement.
I'd be curious what Hal thinks of that.
It goes back to my earlier comment. I see a real value in storage in a overall portfolio, but I'm really concerned when you have a whole bunch of little portfolio standards that no one ever looks at in their sum.
All right, we only have time for 2 more questions. We've got those already, so and then you're next. Yeah.
Hello, is this on?
Yep.
Hello, my name is Johnson Wu, and I work at Cisco. And thank you very much, the panelists, for a very informative and thought-provoking session today. My question is twofold. One is, how would you characterize the market challenges here in California versus the rest of the country? And then also at a national, international level, could you also characterize the market challenges in the U.S. versus the rest of the world?
Can you summarize the question?
Sorry?
Could you repeat the question again?
So what are the challenges between California and the rest of the nation and U.S. versus the rest of the world, and where are we going with that? Is that right? Pretty much. It's a pretty big question.
I'll
Yeah,
take
that's, it's a great question, and it's a big one, and it's very, very topical and current, especially as we're talking to a lot of stakeholders here in California. And, you know, wearing my strategist hat, we do work outside of the state of California. We're very active in Ontario right now, for example. There's a feed-in tariff there. And what always impresses me when we step outside of California is somehow how less complicated things are when you step outside the boundaries of California. And, you know, it's complicated here, but, you know, and I'm not just outright criticizing it. There's a really, in some ways, the process is valuable. We have a really good cost-benefit methodology and looking at how to implement successful programs, but it is challenging, and there's many, you know, I'll just give you the example that we face at CISA. Take the issue of renewables, and, you know, I think it's been discussed a lot that storage is really key to renewables. Well, to, you know, sort of cover our bases here in California, we have to connect the dots with renewables and storage through the Integrated Energy Policy Report at the CEC. There is a renewables proceeding at the CPUC, which is dealing with renewables procurement. It's dealing with renewables. There's a feed-in tariff that's under discussion, so there's distributed renewables from the 2 to 20 megawatt scale, and then there's customer-sited renewables. There is also a long-term transmission planning process to achieve the 33% renewables at CalISO. And then, of course, with the governor's recent executive order, now there's a new agency involved that's been charged with implementing the 33% RPS, and that's the Air Resources Board. So that's just one particular issue area, and just as an example of the complexity here. I think another interesting, and again, it's a double-edged sword, but here in California, we've been a leader in environmental permitting and standards. We don't have that many storage projects installed relative to other leading nations like Japan and Germany. And so I think one challenge and opportunity for us is to figure out how to streamline the permitting and siting of storage. And it's going to vary depending on which application you're talking about. So on the other side, I would say that California is blessed, and I know we were told to bring it back to Silicon Valley, as we have some of the greatest engineering minds here in the country. This is a very forward-thinking place. We've got a lot of renewable energy investment, a lot of momentum, very forward-thinking stakeholders that kind of really get it and sort of the role that energy storage can play. And, you know, last I checked, who were some of the big winners of energy storage grants and the ARA funding? Well, they were, you know, a couple of storage startups right here in California. In fact, California secured, what was it, more than half of the ARA funding for energy storage. So, you know, to Brad's point, that this is a huge market opportunity. We have all the best companies and the best technology, speaking to your company, Cisco, for smart grid communications and the interoperability of these different assets. So I think we got a lot going for us here in the Sunshine State.
Any other, I guess that tagline on that is, it's complicated, right? Any other?
Oh, maybe I could also talk about that. I talked about our larger storage systems, which you know, may seem like they don't lend themselves to Silicon Valley solutions, but I think there's a need there for control work. And you know, the discussion earlier from Brad about demand dispatch. The demand dispatch and storage dispatch and all those things need the type of communications and monitoring and controls that Silicon Valley is very well known for. Mm-hmm. So between the software and the systems, I think there's a lot of activity here that, yes, there are opportunities for the devices themselves, but there's a whole lot more opportunity for the systems that are needed to integrate this and get full advantage out of them.
Right, the intelligence behind it.
Yes.
Right. All right, well, we're going to move on to our last question, and it's only appropriate that it comes from Brad.
It's not a question, it's a comment. The question about FERC and transmission planning at the Senate hearing in December. It was made crystal clear that FERC really needs to consider in any transmission approval project, was storage considered as a part of that whole process? And that needs to become part of their whole planning process, and I think that will finally happen.
Well, thank you. Help me thank the panelists for their time here today.